The explosion lifted Staff Sergeant Ellie Young off her feet and slammed her into the mud brick wall of the Afghan compound. For a moment, the world went silent except for a high-pitched ringing in her ears. Through the dust and smoke, she saw Commander James "Hammer" Harrison struggling to stand, blood streaming from a wound in his thigh, his M4 carbine still clutched in his hands as he fired 3-round bursts at the Taliban fighters pouring through the breach in the wall. "Medic!" someone screamed, and Ellie realized with a jolt that she was the medic they were calling for. She pushed herself up, her medical pack somehow still attached to her back, and saw the full scope of the disaster. Half of her squad was down. The Taliban had caught them in a perfect ambush in this remote valley in Helmand province, and now they were closing in for the kill. Commander Harrison was trying to coordinate a defense, but the blood pooling around his right leg told her he had minutes, maybe less, before he'd bleed out. What happened in the next 47 minutes would become one of the most decorated actions in modern military history, earning Ellie Young the Medal of Honor and forever changing how the military viewed combat medics. But in that moment, covered in dust and blood, all she knew was that her commander was dying, her squad was pinned down, and she was the only one who could save them. 6 hours earlier, the mission had seemed routine. Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, had been tasked with clearing a suspected Taliban weapons cache in the Korangal Valley, a place the soldiers had nicknamed Valley of Death for good reason. Staff Sergeant Ellie Young had been a combat medic for 6 years, with 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. At 28, she'd seen more trauma than most emergency room doctors see in a lifetime. The intel had suggested light resistance, maybe a handful of fighters guarding the cache. Commander Harrison had taken a reinforced squad of 12 soldiers, including Ellie, figuring it would be a quick in-and-out operation. They'd moved out at 0400, using the darkness to mask their approach through the valley's treacherous terrain. Ellie had always respected Commander Harrison. The 35-year-old officer from Texas had a reputation for leading from the front, never asking his soldiers to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He knew every member of his squad by name, knew their families, their dreams. He'd written recommendation letters for soldiers applying to college, had helped others through divorces and deaths in the family. He was more than a commander, he was the heart of the unit. As they approached the target compound, Specialist Marcus "Rocket" Rodriguez, Walking Point, held up a closed fist. The squad froze. Through her night vision goggles, Ellie could see the compound ahead, a cluster of mud brick buildings surrounded by a low wall. It looked deserted. "Too quiet," Rodriguez whispered over the radio. Harrison moved forward, his M4 at the ready. "Eagle Eye, this is Hammer 1, he called to the Overwatch team positioned on the ridgeline above. "What do you see?" "Negative movement, Hammer 1, came the reply. "Thermal shows maybe 2 or 3 signatures inside the main building." It was the maybe that should have warned them. The Taliban had learned to mask their heat signatures, using thick blankets and underground tunnels to hide from American thermal imaging. But the mission was time-sensitive. They needed to hit the cache before dawn, when the valley would come alive with civilian traffic that the Taliban could blend into. "We go in fast and hard," Harrison decided. "Rodriguez, breach the main gate. Thompson-Lewis, provide covering fire. Young, stay close to me." Ellie checked her medical supplies one more time. Bandages, tourniquets, morphine, quick clot, chest seals, everything she'd need to keep someone alive long enough to reach a field hospital. She'd performed this ritual hundreds of times, but it never got easier, knowing that in minutes she might be using these supplies on people she'd eaten breakfast with that morning. They moved toward the compound in a tactical column, their boots silent on the rocky ground. Rodriguez placed the breaching charge on the gate while the others took covering positions. Ellie positioned herself behind Harrison, close enough to reach him quickly if needed, far enough back to avoid the immediate kill zone. Breaching in 3, 2, 1. The explosion shattered the pre-dawn quiet, blowing the gate inward. Rodriguez was first through, followed by Harrison and the others. Ellie entered fourth, her M9 pistol in one hand, medical pack in the other. The compound erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up from every window, doorway, and fighting position. It wasn't 3 fighters, it was 30, maybe more. The Taliban had turned the compound into a kill box, and Charlie Company had walked right into it. Private First Class Danny Thompson, barely 19 and on his first deployment, took a round to the chest. His body armor stopped it, but the impact spun him around. A second round caught him in the neck, and he went down spraying blood. "Man down!" someone yelled, and Ellie was moving before the words finished echoing. She slid to Thompson's side, her hands already pulling out a combat gauze. The wound was bad. The bullet had nicked the carotid artery. She applied direct pressure while fishing for a hemostatic agent with her other hand. "You're okay, Danny," she lied, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Just a scratch. I've got you." Around her, the firefight intensified. The distinctive crack of AK-47s mixed with the sharper sound of American M4s. RPGs screamed overhead, exploding against the compound walls. Through it all, she heard Harrison's voice, steady and commanding. "Lewis, suppress that window. Rodriguez, get a grenade in that doorway. We need to move to cover." Ellie managed to stop Thompson's bleeding, but he'd lost too much blood. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. She hit him with a morphine auto-injector and dragged him behind a low wall, marking him with a casualty card for the Medevac that would hopefully come. That's when the second wave hit. Taliban fighters poured through breaches they'd blown in the compound's outer walls. They'd been hiding in tunnels, waiting for the Americans to commit to the fight. It was a perfect trap. "Fall back! Fall back to the main building," Harrison commanded, firing his M4 in controlled bursts as he covered the squad's retreat. Ellie grabbed Thompson under the arms, trying to drag him toward the building. Specialist Jennifer Jinx Mitchell appeared at her side, helping to carry the wounded soldier. Together, they made it to the relative safety of the main building, where the squad was establishing a hasty defense. The room was chaos. Sergeant First Class Robert Bull Kowalski was bleeding from shrapnel wounds to his arm and face. Private Jacob White had taken a round through the calf and was trying to tourniquet himself with shaking hands. The radio operator, Corporal Sam Chen, was screaming into his handset, calling for immediate close air support and medical evacuation. "Negative on the birds," came the response. "Weather's moving in." Nothing can fly for at least 2 hours. 2 hours. In this fight, that was a lifetime. Ellie moved from soldier to soldier, assessing wounds, applying tourniquets, administering morphine. Her hands worked automatically, muscle memory from countless hours of training taking over. She didn't think about the bullets cracking overhead or the RPGs exploding nearby. Her world narrowed to the wounded in front of her. Harrison continued to coordinate the defense, moving from window to window, directing fire, calling out enemy positions. His presence was everywhere, holding the squad together through sheer force of will. Then the IED went off. The Taliban had planted it in the floor of the building, probably weeks ago, waiting for exactly this moment. The explosion tore through the room, throwing bodies like rag dolls. The roof partially collapsed, raining debris and dust. Ellie found herself on the floor, ears ringing, vision blurred. She pushed herself up, coughing in the thick dust, and immediately looked for wounded. What she saw made her blood run cold. Commander Harrison was down, his right leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood pumping from a massive wound in his thigh. His femoral artery had been hit. He had minutes before he bled out. Ellie crawled to him, her medical pack miraculously still on her back. Harrison's eyes were open but unfocused, his face already pale from blood loss. His M4 was still in his hands, and even semi-conscious, he was trying to aim it at the doorway where Taliban fighters were attempting to rush in. "Sir, I need you to stay still," Ellie said, ripping open her last tourniquet. "The squad," Harrison mumbled, blood bubbling from his lips. Internal injuries, too. "I've got it, sir. Just stay with me." She applied the tourniquet high on his thigh, cranking it tight until the bleeding slowed, but she could see other wounds. Shrapnel to the abdomen, possible punctured lung. He needed a surgeon, not a field medic. Around her, the situation was deteriorating. Half the squad was wounded. They were almost out of ammunition. The Taliban fighters were pressing closer, sensing victory. That's when Ellie made the decision that would define the rest of her life. "Mitchell! Kowalski! Can you still fight?" she yelled. Barely, Mitchell replied, blood streaming down her face from a scalp wound. Hold the north wall. Chen, keep calling for support. Everyone who can shoot, pick a window and make every round count. She turned back to Harrison, who was trying to focus on her face. Young, get them out, he whispered. Not without you, sir. She grabbed him under the arms and started dragging him toward the back of the building, where there was marginally better cover. Harrison weighed at least 200 pounds with his gear, but adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Bullets cracked past her head, so close she could feel the heat. An RPG exploded against the wall, showering them with debris. Harrison, even in his semi-conscious state, kept his M4 raised, firing short bursts at any Taliban fighter who showed himself. His training was so ingrained that even dying, he was still fighting. They made it to a small storage room in the back of the building. Ellie propped Harrison against the wall and did a rapid assessment. The tourniquet was holding, but he'd already lost too much blood. His breathing was labored, definitely a punctured lung. Without immediate surgery, he wouldn't make it. Young, Harrison's voice was barely a whisper. Take my rifle. The squad needs. Sir, you're going to be fine. The Medevac. No birds coming. He coughed, blood speckling his lips. You know what needs to be done. From the main room, she heard Chen's desperate voice. They're coming through the east wall. We can't hold. Ellie looked at Harrison's M4, then at his face. His eyes, though glazed with pain, were clear. He knew what he was asking. The squad needed every fighter, and right now, keeping him alive meant she couldn't help defend their position. Sir, I'm a medic. I save lives. You're a soldier first, Harrison interrupted, his voice gaining strength through sheer will. And right now, those soldiers need a leader. Be that leader, Young. The sound of the firefight was getting closer. She could hear Taliban voices, excited, sensing that the Americans were almost finished. Ellie made her choice. She grabbed Harrison's M4, checking the magazine, half full. She pulled his remaining magazines from his vest, stuffing them into her own pouches. The rifle felt strange in her hands. She'd qualified with it in basic training, of course, and did the mandatory range time, but she'd never fired one in combat. Her weapon was medicine, not bullets. I'll be back for you, sir, she promised. I know you will, Harrison replied, managing a weak smile. Now go. That's an order. Ellie burst from the storage room to find the main room in chaos. Rodriguez was down, unconscious or dead. Mitchell was firing from a window, her ammunition nearly gone. Chen was still on the radio, but his voice was hoarse from screaming. Only 5 soldiers were still combat effective, and they were being overwhelmed. Mitchell, what's your ammo count? Ellie yelled, taking position at a window. Last mag! Through the window, Ellie could see Taliban fighters massing for a final assault, at least 20 of them, moving through the rubble and smoke. In minutes, they'd overrun the building. That's when her medical training kicked in, but in an unexpected way. In medicine, you learn to see patterns, to diagnose problems quickly and act decisively. Looking at the Taliban positions, she saw the pattern of their attack. They were bunching up at 2 breach points, creating choke points, fatal funnels, Harrison would have called them. Chen, you still got those grenades? She called. 2 frags, 1 smoke. Mitchell, Lewis, concentrate fire on the left breach. Everyone else, watch the right. Chen, get ready with those frags. She raised Harrison's M4, the AROG scope settling on a Taliban fighter carrying an RPG. She controlled her breathing, just like they'd taught her in basic. Exhale halfway, hold, squeeze the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The fighter dropped. It was different from medicine. In medicine, she fought to save lives. Here, she had to take them to save others. But the goal was the same, protect her patients, her squad. Another fighter appeared in her scope. 3-round burst, he went down. Frag out, Chen yelled, lobbing a grenade through the left breach. The explosion sent bodies flying. Ellie kept firing, her rounds disciplined and accurate. Every shot mattered. They were too low on ammunition to spray and pray. The medical part of her brain noted the wounds she was inflicting with clinical detachment. Center mass hits that would cause massive internal trauma, headshots that dropped fighters instantly. Reloading, Mitchell called. Covering, Ellie responded, shifting her fire to Mitchell's sector. The Taliban assault wavered. They'd expected to overrun a demoralized, wounded squad. Instead, they were facing organized resistance, bodies piled up at the breach points. But Ellie knew they couldn't hold forever. They were down to their last magazines, and the Taliban had unlimited reinforcements. They needed a game changer. That's when she remembered the intel about the weapons cache. Chen, the cache, where exactly is it? Intel said the building across the courtyard, northeast corner. Ellie looked through the window. The building was maybe 50 meters away, but those 50 meters were open ground, covered by Taliban fire. It would be suicide to try to reach it. Unless, Chen, pop smoke between us in that building. Mitchell, Lewis, Kowalski, covering fire on my signal. Young, what are you? Mitchell began. We need those weapons. I'm going for the cache. That's insane. So is dying here. On my mark, Chen threw the smoke grenade. Purple smoke billowed across the courtyard. Mitchell and the others opened fire, forcing the Taliban to take cover. Ellie sprinted from the building. Time seemed to slow. She could hear bullets cracking past, feel them tugging at her equipment. The smoke provided some concealment, but not cover. A round sparked off the ground inches from her feet. Another punched through her medical pack. She covered the 50 meters in what felt like hours, but was probably seconds. She hit the door of the target building at full speed, crashing through. Inside, she found exactly what they had hoped for. Crates of weapons and ammunition, including several RPG-7s and boxes of AK-47s. But more importantly, she found blocks of C4 with detonators. The Taliban had been planning something big. Working quickly, she grabbed an RPG and several rockets, slinging them across her back. She stuffed her pockets with M4 magazines from a crate of captured American supplies. Then she had an idea that would have made any combat engineer proud. She rigged 2 blocks of C4 with a simple timer, the kind of improvised explosive she'd seen too many times in Iraq, now turned against the enemy. She set it for 3 minutes, then grabbed as much ammunition as she could carry and sprinted back toward her building. The smoke was dissipating. A Taliban fighter emerged from cover, AK raised. Ellie fired Harrison's M4 from the hip, dropping him. Another fighter appeared. 3-round burst. Down. She crashed back through the door of their building, ammunition spilling from her arms. "Grab everything," she yelled, dumping the supplies. "We're displacing in 2 minutes." "Displacing where?" Mitchell asked, grabbing fresh magazines. "There's a depression in the ground 20 meters north. Better cover than here. Move the wounded first." She ran to the storage room where she'd left Harrison. He was still conscious, barely. His face was ghost white, but his eyes tracked to her as she entered. "Heard shooting," he whispered. "Had to borrow your rifle, sir. Hope you don't mind." She grabbed him under the arms again, beginning the exhausting drag toward their new position. The other soldiers were moving too, carrying or dragging the wounded. They'd just cleared the building when the C4 detonated. The explosion was massive. The weapons cache had contained more explosives than she'd realized. The entire building vanished in a ball of fire that rose 100 feet into the air. The shockwave knocked everyone flat. But it also had another effect. It stunned the Taliban fighters who'd been preparing for another assault. "Move! Move!" Ellie yelled, half carrying, half dragging Harrison to the depression. It wasn't much, just a natural fold in the ground about 3 feet deep. But it was better than the compromised building. They slid in, immediately setting up defensive positions. Ellie propped Harrison against the earthen wall, checking his wounds. The tourniquet was holding, but his breathing was getting worse. "That was impressive," Harrison managed. "Save your strength, sir." The Taliban fighters were recovering from the explosion, but they were more cautious now. The massive blast had shown that the Americans still had fight in them. They began probing attacks, testing the defenses. Ellie continued to command the defense while simultaneously treating the wounded. She'd shift from applying a pressure dressing to firing Harrison's M4, from administering morphine to directing fields of fire. She was everywhere at once, medic and warrior combined. "Young, I've got comms with a Predator drone," Chen called suddenly. "They can give us eyes on enemy positions." The drone operator's voice crackled through the radio. "Charlie Company, this is Eagle Eye. We count approximately 40 enemy fighters converging on your position. Recommend immediate extraction." "Negative on extraction," Ellie replied, having taken over tactical command with Harrison incapacitated. "We have non-ambulatory wounded. Request immediate close air support. Nearest fast movers are 30 minutes out. Can you hold? 30 minutes, with 40 Taliban fighters closing in and ammunition running low." "We'll hold," Ellie said with more confidence than she felt. She turned to the squad, what was left of it. 5 soldiers still capable of fighting, 6 wounded including Harrison. The math was impossible. But then she remembered something Harrison had said during a training exercise months ago. When the math doesn't work, change the equation. "Chen, that predator, is it armed?" "Negative, surveillance only." "What about artillery? Any fire bases in range?" "Firebase lightning is about 15 clicks out, but we're danger close for artillery. Get them on the line." While Chen worked the radio, Ellie studied their position through Harrison's rifle scope. The Taliban were massing in 3 groups, preparing for a coordinated assault from multiple directions. But they were making a mistake. They were bunching up, using the same covered approaches to avoid the Americans' line of sight. "Firebase lightning online," Chen reported. "Lightning, this is Charlie Company," Ellie said, taking the handset. "Request immediate suppression, danger close. I have the coordinates." "Charlie Company, that's inside danger close range. We need—" "I'm the senior combat effective soldier, and I'm calling it in. Grid reference." She rattled off the coordinates, using the drone's feed to precisely target the Taliban positions. "Charlie Company, confirm you have adequate cover." Ellie looked at their shallow depression, then at her wounded soldiers. It wasn't adequate, not really, but it was all they had. "Confirmed. Fire for effect. Rounds out. 40 seconds to impact. Take cover. Everyone down. Danger close," Ellie yelled, pushing herself on top of Harrison to shield him with her body. The world exploded. The 155mm howitzer rounds impacted like the fist of God. The ground shook. Dirt and debris rained down. The concussion was overwhelming, even at their distance. Ellie felt like her chest was being compressed, her lungs unable to draw breath. But the effect on the Taliban positions was devastating. The bunched-up fighters were caught in the open. Through the dust and smoke, she could see bodies thrown through the air, fighting positions obliterated. "Adjust fire," she called, using the drone feed to walk the artillery onto the surviving enemy positions. "Drop 50, left 100. More rounds impacted. The Taliban assault disintegrated. The survivors began to flee, their morale shattered by the devastating fire. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Ellie called. "Enemy retreating." In the sudden silence that followed, she could hear the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. "Charlie Company, this is Dustoff 3-1, came a new voice on the radio. "We're 5 minutes out. Pop smoke for visual. The Medevac helicopters. Somehow they'd found a window in the weather." Ellie popped a green smoke grenade, then turned her attention back to the wounded. Harrison was still breathing, but barely. Thompson had slipped into shock. Rodriguez was conscious now, but confused, probably a concussion. The next few minutes were a blur. The Blackhawks came in hot, door gunners laying down suppressive fire, even though the Taliban had retreated. The flight medics jumped out, joining Ellie in rapidly triaging and loading the wounded. "Who's in command here?" one of the flight medics asked. "That would be Sergeant Young," Chen said, pointing to Ellie. The flight medic looked at Ellie, covered in blood, dirt, and dust. Harrison's M4 still slung across her chest, medical pack torn and bullet-riddled. "You're the medic who called in the artillery?" "Someone had to," Ellie replied, helping to load Harrison onto a stretcher. His eyes found hers as they lifted him. "Young," he whispered. She leaned close. "Thank you," he said simply. "Just doing my job, sir." "No," he managed a weak smile. "You did everyone's job." As the helicopters lifted off with the wounded, Ellie finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion. She'd been running on adrenaline for over an hour. Now, with the immediate threat gone and her patients evacuated, she felt like she could barely stand. Mitchell appeared at her side, offering a canteen. I don't even have words for what that was. Ellie took a long drink, then looked at the devastation around them. The compound was in ruins. Bodies, mostly Taliban, littered the ground. Smoke rose from numerous fires. It looked like something out of an apocalypse movie. "I'm a medic," Ellie said quietly. "I'm supposed to save lives." "You did save lives," Mitchell replied. "All of ours." The reinforcements arrived 20 minutes later. A full platoon from Firebase Lightning, ready for a fight that was already over. Their lieutenant, a young West Pointer who'd probably never seen combat this intense, surveyed the scene with wide eyes. "Who was the on-scene commander?" he asked. "Sergeant Young," Chen said, again pointing to Ellie. "She took over when Commander Harrison was wounded." The lieutenant looked at Ellie with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "A medic did all this." "A soldier did this," Mitchell corrected, "who happens to also be a medic. The after-action report would take hours to compile. The intelligence gathered from the destroyed weapons cache would prove invaluable. But more importantly, the story of what happened in that valley would spread through the military like wildfire. A combat medic had taken command when her commander fell. She'd coordinated a defense against overwhelming odds. She'd assaulted an enemy position alone to secure ammunition. She'd called in danger-close artillery to save her squad. And through it all, she'd continued to provide medical care to the wounded. 3 months later, Ellie stood in the East Room of the White House, her dress uniform immaculate, her new Master Sergeant stripes still feeling strange on her shoulders. Commander Harrison was there too, walking with a cane but walking. Thompson had survived, though he'd been medically discharged. Rodriguez had recovered fully and was back on duty. The president read the citation. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." As the Medal of Honor was placed around her neck, Ellie thought about that moment in the compound when she'd picked up Harrison's rifle. She'd crossed a line that day, from healer to warrior and back again. Some would say she'd compromised her role as a medic, but she knew the truth. She'd done what needed to be done to save lives, whether that meant applying tourniquets or calling in artillery. After the ceremony, Harrison approached her. He walked slowly but steadily, the months of physical therapy paying off. "I never properly thanked you," he said. "You already did, sir." In the helicopter. "No, I mean..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You didn't just save my life. You saved all our lives. You became the leader we needed when we needed it most." "I just did what you would have done, sir," Harrison smiled. "No, Young. You did what you had to do. That's what makes you exceptional." Later, at the reception, Ellie found herself in conversation with the Army Chief of Staff, a grizzled general with more combat experience than anyone in the room. "Sergeant Young," he said, "what you did has started a conversation at the highest levels about the role of combat medics, about emergency command authority, about a lot of things. Some people are saying medics shouldn't be taking offensive actions, that it violates medical neutrality." "And what do you say, sir?" The general smiled. "I say that in combat, you do whatever it takes to bring your people home. You proved that a medic can be a warrior when necessary without losing sight of their primary mission. You've changed how we think about battlefield medicine. The impact of that day extended far beyond medals and recognition." The Army revised its combat medic training, adding more extensive weapons and tactical training. The concept of combat medic as emergency leader became part of doctrine. Ellie herself was brought in to help develop and teach the new protocols. But the most meaningful moment came 6 months after the fight, when she received a package from Danny Thompson's mother. Inside was a simple letter. "My son is alive because of you. Not just because you treated his wounds, but because you made sure there was a helicopter to evacuate him. Thank you for being both a healer and a warrior when my boy needed both." Ellie kept that letter in her pocket for the rest of her deployment. It reminded her that sometimes the best way to save lives is to be willing to fight for them. The Hippocratic Oath said, "First, do no harm." But in war, sometimes preventing harm meant picking up a rifle and finishing the mission. Years later, as Command Sergeant Major Young stood before a class of new combat medics at Fort Sam Houston, she would tell them, "You are healers first, always, but you are also soldiers." There may come a time when you have to choose between treating a wound and preventing more wounds from happening. When that moment comes, remember that your ultimate mission is to preserve life by any means necessary. She would show them the scars on her hands, not from combat, but from the countless IVs she'd started, the pressure bandages she'd applied, the lives she'd fought to save. And then she'd show them her marksmanship badge, earned after that day in the valley when she'd learned that sometimes a medic's most important tool isn't a bandage or a tourniquet. It's the courage to do whatever needs to be done. The tradition of combat medics as pure non-combatants had died